Welcome back to From the Shed End with myself, TDOT. As always, thank you very much for joining me for a brand new video. Before we get into the content, as always, please go and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And also, please go and hit the Linktree link in the description. That will take you to all our podcast episodes and all our social accounts as well. Now, some news came out today. Frank Lampard gave us some bad news, not good news, unfortunately, Chelsea fans. But he's told us that Reece James will be out for the remainder of this season due to a hamstring injury that was picked up during the Real Madrid game in the Champions League. And I'm going to be honest, it's no surprise. It is no surprise the fact that Reece James has injured himself again. And I put this down to a lot of things. Firstly, I think we've been playing Reece James, but whilst he's been injured, whilst he's not been 100% fit, and I think that's come back to haunt us. He's had some really key, massive injuries over the last 2 seasons, and now we're sort of seeing the back end of it, the impacts of that, and how that's impacting him. So I think there's a lot that obviously Reece James needs to do in the summer. He's just signed a relatively new deal not too long ago. But he's someone that we need. He's going to be so crucial next season, regardless of, how things will be in terms of next season with Malo Gusto and how many games that we won't be playing, obviously with no Champions League. But, Reece James is going to be crucial regardless. And we need a fully fit Reece James to come back next season. He has to come back fully fit. And my only worry with Reece James is, you think back to that season where, we were dubbing him the best in the world. He was world class. He was this, he was that. But he's put on he carries a lot of muscle. And I think I've spoke about that on one of the podcast episodes that we've done recently, that he carries a lot of muscle for a defender, for someone who's going back and forth down that wing, lunging in for tackles. All that takes an impact on your body. And yeah, I mean, he's got to get himself in the right shape for next season, whether that's mentally and physically, but both really. But he's got to be in the best shape possible to compete next season, because to be honest, Malo Gusto coming in isn't actually a bad thing. It might, we go back to that Ben Chilwell, Marcos Alonso, that season where we had arguably 2 left backs or left wing backs in a really good position, and they both pushed each other to the beyond their limits to make sure that they were in contention. They were the first in line to play in that position, and we could be in that situation on the right hand side next season with Malo Gusto, who hasn't got the best of injury records himself at a very young age, very similar to Reece James. But for both of them, this is a really good defining season for both of them. Reece James is just hitting that part of his career now where he should be, if not at the top, but reaching to the top of his pinnacle of his career, consistently putting him back to back performances and very rarely missing games. And for someone of his age, Malo Gusto as well, he's obviously a slightly younger than Reece, but he should be someone that could, 1, compete for the opportunity to play a lot more football next season, but 2, he also has to keep himself fully fit next season. I think it's a massive season for both players, but more so for Reece. We know what he can give us. We know what he can do defensively and going forward. But, we have to say especially the last couple of games, the Champions League games, especially against Real Madrid, he didn't look himself. So there's a question there around, is he actually fully fit? Is he fit enough to be in the team? Have we rushed him back when he's come back from these injuries? And I'd probably say yes, we have. Now, another player that was mentioned this afternoon in the press conference was Mason Mount. Another player that's picked up a lot of injuries this season, but more so now the pelvic injury, which I think he's been carrying for some weeks or maybe even some months. He's now going to have some minor surgery on that, which will potentially see him out for the rest of the season, if not until the very end, the last couple of games of the season. So you can probably say that Mason Mount won't feature again this season if you're a football man and your football and injuries. And if you've had any real injuries yourself, you'll know that the recuperation is just as much as important as the time out the squad. So Mason Mount, I mean, it's a difficult one because he hasn't really played much football as well, like Reece James this season. But look, Maurizio's meant to be coming in the next couple of days, couple of weeks or so, and we all know. I think Matt Law's already said this this afternoon that Mason Mount is a fan favorite, but also a Pochettino favorite as well. He's a big fan of him. So, there's obviously a lot of question marks around his contractual issues. I think there was a discussion last week with Todd Bowley around trying to reduce down that 8-year offer that's been put to him, maybe down to a 3 or 4 deal, maybe even less than that. But there is still a massive factor around the wages with Mason Mount. And, if we keep Mason Mount and he's here next season, and as I said, Pochettino is a favourite of him. He wants to see what we can get out of him next season. Then we have to do everything in our power to keep him and to keep him fully fit. The same with Reece James. The same with any players, N'Golo Kante. But the ones that are the standout players, Kante, Reece James, Mason Mount. Mason Mount when he plays, and when you think back to those back-to-back player of the seasons, he's arguably one of the best players in the Premier League. So you don't go from that form and then just become a rubbish player overnight. So there's still a good player in Mason Mount. It makes zero sense to me why we would strengthen one of our rivals, whether that's Liverpool or United. And I think very much like Reece James, we have to give him a pre-season if he stays at the club, get him fit for the pre-season, the US tour, the summer series that we're going to be part of with the other Premier League teams. But we have to get both of them fully fit. They have to be fully fit to compete which is going to be a very reduced season with no European football by the looks of it. But we have to get this over the line in terms of the two of them being fully fit, getting them signed off, medically fit for the season, not rushing them back because we've got an important game. We need them to be fully fit for the pre-season. It's a blessing in disguise that they're not playing, the last couple of games for me. I think that's probably the best thing to do. Keep them at even especially Mason Mount, who's come under a lot of criticism this season. Keep them at the limelight and let's see how, if, as I said, Mason Mount stays, let's see how he gets on next season under a new manager. A group of players that will need that time just like him. Madueke, Mudryk as well. Some of the other players that we might bring in, and Cuckoo's meant to be coming. So there's a lot of players that are going to be coming in that are going to need to embed and understand how, the new manager is going to want them to play. And Mason Mount has a massive role to play in there. So he has to stay fit next season if we keep him. And for me personally, as I've always said, and I'm going to stick to what I've said, I don't want Mason Mount to leave the club. But if there's a player that doesn't want to stay at the club, or a player that's flirting with other clubs and wants to move, then so be it. But I do think at the same time as well, if he wants to stay and we can offer him the deal that he wants, we've got to play with Mason Mount, a young player as well. Sometimes we talk about Mason Mount like he hasn't hit his pinnacle. He hasn't hit the top of his game very much like Reece James hasn't. So those two players now are so crucial. And to lose Reece James throughout the season that we just have, it's shown how different our season's gone. To lose Ben Chilwell, it's shown how different our season's been. To lose N'Golo Kante. So these are key players we're talking about. They're not fringe players. They're not players that we need to get out of the club, or we want to see leave the club. These are players that should be starting week in, week out, and we have to wrap them in cotton wool and give them that time to recuperate properly. Otherwise, we're going to be in the same situation that we're in this season, next season as well. But talking of managerial change, talking of change in the hot seats, we went from Julian Nagelsmann to Luis Enrique, back to Julian Nagelsmann, back to, I can't remember who else we've been linked to. We've been linked with every man and his dog recently. But with the news that Fabrizio Romano has come out with today, he did say in his tweet earlier on that there's a tweet that went out to say, understand crucial meeting took place on Monday in Spain between Maurizio Pochettino and Chelsea. Chelsea are closing in on details of the agreement with Pochettino. Deal at the final stages, waiting on official contract to be offered. So, with that being said, you would expect Maurizio Pochettino to be the front runner now. There seems to be advanced talks that I think were mentioned yesterday, and now we're at that final stage, which is probably just to make sure the ink is wet on the paper. Once that deal's been signed, you would expect maybe, if not the end of this week, the start of next week, maybe as we go into that weekend, we approach the weekend, we'll get an announcement to say that he is here, and that, he's the new manager. Now, what do I think about Pochettino? Obviously, I was asked this when he was named as one of the 3 candidates to get the job. And look, Pochettino done very well at Southampton. We have to forget that he had a really good team there. He got them playing some really good football. Had some brilliant players there at the time as well. And at Spurs, he done the same. You know, he got them competing for the league. You know, we forget about that moment when we beat Spurs and almost gifted Leicester the league. So brilliant goal, as I say that, but brilliant goal by Hazard. Link up, I think it was with Diego Costa. It was a brilliant game. Battle at White Hart Lane. But no, I think, you know, in terms of Mauricio Pochettino, I think he's a really good manager. You know, he got the best out of that Spurs squad, and we have to. I mean, you look now, the majority of those players that are there, you know, the Eric Dyers, the Harry Kanes, Heung-min Son, Lloris. You know, it's a lot of the squad that he had there. You know, yes, they brought players in since he left, but that spine is almost the same team when you think about it. So he done well to get the best out of a Spurs team that, when you look back on paper, isn't really that good. They've been covering over cracks for years. Champions League final, you know, they lost, of course, but to still get there, to still get into those situations where you're in the final, you know, he's won things in France with PSG. He's had difficult players to deal with. So, I mean, he ticks a lot of the boxes, Pochettino. He ticks a lot of the boxes for me. Was he my first choice? Not really. Did I have one? Not really, no. Because, you know, you're going back to that situation. I did not think Graham Potter was going to be sacked, you know, after the backing of Todd Bowley, this long-term vision. I assumed they were going to stick by him and see it through. Obviously, Frank Lampard could never have been in contention. But, look, Pochettino coming in, for me, a Premier League proven manager, someone that knows how to churn out results. And you got to remember as well where Spurs were when Pochettino was initially given a job as well. I mean, they weren't pushing for the league. They weren't in Champions League final. So I think he hit a massive ceiling with Spurs. And I think he was able to get the best out of a really bad team. And we are kind of where Spurs are. You know, they you know, we're not pushing for the league. We're not in Champions League finals. We're not trying to compete with anything. So this is probably the best time to bring in a manager like Mauricio Pochettino, someone that has the experience of dealing with players, bringing in youth players. You look at some of those players who brought in, you know, the Carney Chukwuemeka's and Amari Hutchinson, Mudryk, Madueke. You know, he's Paddy Shield. These are players that, you know, would probably thrive under a Pochettino. So it makes a lot of sense. And again, you have to go back to the initial vision of the owners. You know, sacking Thomas Tuchel, would it have been the right thing to bring in an ex-Spurs manager at the time? And, you know, I know a lot of people bang on about the ex-Spurs stuff, but we have to remember a lot of the Chelsea managers, you know, AVB, Jose, Antonio Conte, have all gone to Spurs. We have to remember Glenn Hoddle played for Spurs and came to Chelsea and managed us for 3 years. So this whole ex-Spurs stuff, it doesn't really bother me. You know, we've had players there that have done the same. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the Pochettino reign. I'm looking forward to the announcement. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do with some of these players that we've brought in for big money. And seeing where we go from there. I think it's going to be. I think if it is Pochettino, I'm looking forward to it more so than maybe Nagelsmann and Enrique. And we have to remember as well, you know, they've probably got this. You know, Thomas Tuchel lost a Champions League final as well. Yes, he won one, but you know, you'd expect Pochettino with better players to be able to progress even further and break through that ceiling that he couldn't do at Spurs. So I'm looking forward to that as well. But as we move on, let's quickly do a match preview. Not really much to play for, not really much to talk about in terms of what can we do now. I think we're more at the stage, you know, with playing the players that we potentially need to give some minutes to. Do I think we'll win? I mean, if you remember a couple of seasons ago, or I think it was last season, that we lost this fixture 4-1 at home, Stamford Bridge. So it's a game that obviously Brentford are in really good form, and there's a player that I've been calling out on here for many weeks, Ivan Toney. I bet my house on Ivan Toney scoring against us tomorrow night. But quickly, in terms of a lineup, what I've gone for. Well, obviously with the news that there's been injuries from Frank Lampard's press conference, I've gone for Kepa in goal. Reece James obviously being out, I've gone for back five. Ruben Loftus-Cheek as right wing back. Badia Shield, Thiago Silva and Wesley Fofana as my centre-backs, with Ben Chilwell as a left wing-back. I've gone with N'Golo Kante and Enzo Fernandez as the midfield. And I've gone for a three of Mykhailo Mudryk, Noni Madueke and João Felix up front. And I think this is probably a time where we have to start thinking about the likes of Mateo Kovacic, the likes of Kai Havertz, Conor Gallagher. These players going to be here next season. If they're not, then let's not play them for the remainder of these games. Let's give some of these players, the Carney Chukwuemeka's, an opportunity to just get themselves some minutes before the season's out. We've got nothing to play for in this game. We've got nothing to play for. Let's just allow ourselves the opportunity to see some of these players. Azpilicueta is potentially another one that may start in that role of right centre back, but for someone who hasn't played since I think the Southampton game when he got a concussion, maybe we've seen that was his last game. Maybe he gets a run out last game of the season, but we need to give the players that we want to see next season a run out now. We need to stop playing players just for the sake of it. The Hakim Ziyechs. I mean, if they're leaving, what's the point in having them in the starting 11? It makes no sense to me. So, just looking now quickly at where Brentford are. So Brentford are currently sitting above us. So even if we win, I mean, this is how poor our season's been. Even if we win, we still don't take over 10th place. I mean, it's been that sort of season. But, Brentford, they're still kicking on. They're still potentially trying to push for that, Europa League conference place as well. But for us, I think it's just more getting the players some minutes now, getting players through without injuries, and just seeing the season out with a bit of dignity, bit of respect from the players. So, prediction-wise, I mean, it could go either way. The season's been a roller coaster of a season, but I do think, I do think it'd be a draw. I think we'll be a 1-1. I do think Ivan Toney will score. I do think João Felix will score. I think it'll be a very nothing game, if I'm honest. I think it'll be a game where we won't expect anything out of it. But as long as we don't get a thrashing like Spurs, but against Newcastle at the weekend, I think I'll be happy with a draw, if I'm honest. I think we've got nothing to play for. We haven't got a striker. We haven't touched on Aubameyang, but I will do that tomorrow. I think he needs his own separate segment with links back to Barcelona. Very quick one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about the lineup. What would you go with? What's your score prediction? What do you think about Maurizio Pochettino potentially being a new Chelsea manager as well? And obviously the injuries to Reece James and Mason Mount. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Thank you very much for watching.